the wife of Bath's tale, and then this stuff to begin the Renaissance and 17th century. I believe we left off page 349, second to the last page of the wife of Bath's prologue and tale actually. So the unnamed knight marries she's frequently just called the loathly lady. This is a trope in medieval literature, and not as much later, but definitely in medieval literature. And by the way, I don't think I mentioned last week, there is a possible, if not source, at least analogous tale to the wife of Bath's tale called Sir Gawain and Dame Ragnall. Okay, not too, kind of analogous to Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, obviously also. But this one is more analogous to the wife of Bath's tale. Dame Ragnall is an old loathly lady who kind of pulls tricks and stuff on Sir Gawain. It's humorous. It is a comedy, a burlesque, a satire, a fabuleo of Sir Gawain of the Sir Gawain character, okay? You know, who's supposed to be high and mighty and courteous and all this kind of stuff. Anyways, so we saw them get married, wedding night. Sir Gawain, the unnamed Arthurian knight doesn't want to have anything to do with the loathly lady because she's, one, loathly, ugly, two, old, and three, of low birth. Okay? And beginning around 1105, she starts giving reasons, or reasons isn't the right word. She starts describing his behavior as ultimately being what? Something. Ungentlemanly, unkind, ignoble, unnoble, ignoble. It's, you know, those prefixes are weird. It depends on what comes after. All those kinds of things. And she does it in the context of this idea, gentilesse, which is where we get our modern English word, gentle, okay? Gentilesse is an umbrella term. It's got all kinds of things underneath it. Virtuous behavior, good birth, or gentle birth. It doesn't mean a birth without any painkillers and any pain. It means noble birth. Blue blood idea. High status, okay? Righteous behavior, all right? So she goes through in lists, talks about this in terms of what? The three things he accuses her of, criticizes her for. She says this has nothing to do with birth, has nothing to do with one's heredity. Why? Because one's behavior cannot be passed down. And, as we can look around our world today, one's heredity does not determine one's behavior in any way. You can be highborn and roll in the gutters. You can be born in the gutter and demonstrate more virtuous living than somebody else, etc., etc. And she repeatedly goes back to, maybe not repeatedly, more than once, goes back to Christ as the example. Okay? She finishes all that, so that begins around 1106, and she finishes it with essentially 1218 or so. Okay? So she spends 100 lines chastising him for his behavior. And it says 1219. Let me back up. Let's go back to 1205. And therefore, sir, since that I might not you grieve. Since I don't want to bring grief to you, why not? He's her husband, she's his wife. Okay? Of my poverty, no more you reprove me. She's kind of implying, you keep harping on my either literal poverty or my low birth, and I'm going to have to teach you a lesson. Okay? So, now, sir, of old age, you reprove me. Really? Is old age something she can change? Well, within the fiction of the story, yes, it is. But somebody who's old, you can't blame them for being old. Just like you can't blame somebody for having blue eyes, etc. So, you reprove me for my age. And certainly, sir, though there is no authority and no book, you gentles, your gloss tells you nobles, it's not necessarily nobles. I mean, surface level meaning, yes, okay? But it means you gentlemen, okay? Of honor. What? Say that men should in old white do favor. You should be nice to old people, right? What's the phrase? Respect your elders. It doesn't mean your parents. I mean, it does. It means anybody older than you. You people of honor, you say that people should respect the elderly. You're not respecting me. It's kind of like, down on your knees, respect me, bow. And call them father, for males, for your gentilessa. For your, kind of means on behalf of, to demonstrate your this. Your nobility, your virtue, your right and proper Christian behavior, all that kind of stuff. All right? And I can find authors, as I guess, authorities, that is, who will emphasize this. Oh, I don't know, maybe like the Ten Commandments. Honor your father and mother. That means literal father and mother. It's also been interpreted to mean those who are old enough to be your father and mother. Okay? Now there ye say that I'm, that I'm what? Low-born, check mark, done away with that problem. Okay? That I'm old, check mark, done away with that problem. If you want me to, I can cite chapter and verse. So she says, and now, third problem. You say I'm foul and old. Then dread you not to be a cuckold. If I'm so foul and old, if I'm so ugly and old, then you don't have to worry about me sleeping around with other men. Your wife will be chaste. Your wife will only want you. And he's kind of sitting there going, trying to figure out how this is good for me. For filth, ugliness, and oldness, also might I thrive. Or also I could thrive. I could prosper. I could be a benefit. Be great guardians of chastity. Okay? Any red-blooded living man would look at me and go, no, I don't want her, so my chastity is safe with that person, okay? Or that person's not going to take it, etc. And also because of my age. She says, those are guardians. But nevertheless, since I know your delight, I shall fulfill your worldly appetite. I know what pleases you. He's young, right? We've already been told that. What's going to please him? Beautiful, young, of noble or high birth. He's probably sitting there trying to figure out how are you going to change this? into swimsuit model, Choose now. One of these things tway. One of these two things. And notice, back up just a second. What appetites? Worldly. Fleshly. Not necessarily sinful, but it's kind of implied. If you go back and look at, for example, the writings of St. Paul in the New Testament, he differentiates between the body and the flesh. The flesh is kind of in the worldly desires. Those are sinful because they fulfill only, they don't look to anything hereafter. Okay? So, choose one of these two things. Easy. Have me foul and old till I die, and I'll be to you true and humble, and I'll never displease you. Or, other option, you can have me young and beautiful, and take your chances. That's what adventure means. Of the repair that shall be to your house because of me. Repair. The coming and going. Hanging a red light, essentially out on the front door. So, here's your two choices. And he's like, is there a door number 3? Is there a third option? Okay? Or in some other place, that is, the repair might be to, like, the inn down the road. I'll just have a running tab on a room there where men can visit me. Choose. Which one do you want? The knight adviseth, that is, he advises himself and sorely sighs. Why? Because he has to choose. And finally says, my lady, my love and wife, so dear. Do we even need to read anything else? What does that line tell us? Okay. What else? He's going to choose her for what she is. What else? Deference.
She also, like, has the way.
Okay.
Mastery.
That's going to come. Why does he sigh in the line before? Why does he take counsel to himself and sigh? And then we get, my lady, my life and wife, so dear. What has happened internally in him? This has been pricked. This notion that he has of this, she made it bleed. And what I mean by that is she kind of, she stuck him to the core. She convicted him. And he's like, you're right. You're right. You're right. You're right. Notice 3 foul things about her, 3 terms of endearment. My lady, my love, my wife. And then those all get modified with what? So dear. My lady, so dear. My love, so dear. My wife, so dear. What's it mean to be dear? Close to, bound to, connected. I put me in your wise governance. You're in charge. Choose yourself which may be most pleasant and most honor. To you and me also. Notice he doesn't put himself first. What will bring most pleasure and most honor to you, but also to me? Okay? Notice in her second option, is honor implied there? No, because she's saying, I'm going to be a slut. If you choose me to be young and beautiful, let me rephrase that. She implies she might be. That's a possibility. Why? The old trope about women can't be trusted. Okay? If we were to read all of Shakespeare's sonnets, you would see that is a theme that comes up again and again and again. Okay? And it's prevalent throughout the Renaissance and early 17th century literature. The idea of women's, John Donne even wrote a poem on it. Women's constancy or fidelity. They don't have any, according to this trope. All right? And guess who it all goes back to? Eve. So, he says, I do know first the whether of the two. I don't care. You choose. For as you liketh, it sufficeth me. However you desire, whatever you desire, that is what pleases me. Then have I got of you mastery. Since I may choose and govern as I desire. You know, dangerous territory, right? Because what if she desires to have multiple lovers? Again, part of this idea, the trope that women are unfaithful, is that they can't be satisfied with just one man. Okay? He says, yes, certainly, wife. I hold it the best. I think that's the best course of action. Now, I kind of think, just because I'm a male, that he's probably thinking, please, choose number two. Choose number two. Be young and beautiful. At least I'll get something out of that, you know. And she says, kiss me, we be no longer wroth, angry. Meaning, we're no longer at loggerheads. We're no longer in conflict. He's given her what she wants. Okay? For by my truth, I will be to you both. And he's probably initially thinking, what do you mean? How can you be both? How can you be old and ugly and true and faithful, and simultaneously young and beautiful and possibly unfaithful? That is to say, so she explains, fair and good. I will be fair. Fair means beautiful in all of its contexts. She'll be beautiful of appearance. She'll be beautiful of soul. She'll be beautiful of birth. Okay? And good. What does good never mean? Slightly bad. I'll be good with you, but then I'm going to be slightly bad with John next door. Nope. I pray to God that I may die crazy. Staven means die. That I may die crazy unless I be to you also good and true. True, faithful. As ever was wife, since that the world was new. So, you know, that's a slight undercutting. Why? Because the medieval trope, medieval Renaissance going way, way back, even before then, is that all wives ultimately aren't true. There's always an element, maybe not all wives, most wives. There's always an element of falsity there. Okay? But I think surface level, she means this totally honestly. Okay? Bear in mind, who's the teller? Wife of Bath. Who's had 5 husbands and is looking for number 6. And who lives apparently for what? She makes it clear. Sex. That's it. That's what motivates her. So when the wife puts these words into this wife, the audience, the other pilgrims are kind of going, yeah, right. You? Well, it's not the wife speaking. It's the old lady within the tale speaking. So, I will be to you as good and true as ever was wife since that the world was new. And unless by tomorrow, as fair to see, if I am not by tomorrow morning, as beautiful to see as what? As any lady, empress, or queen that is betwixt the east and also the west, that is, anywhere on the earth. Death with my life and death right as you please. If when you wake up in the morning, I'm not the most gorgeous woman who ever lived, kill me. She's giving him what? That authority. Why? He's given her governance. He's given her mastery. What has she just done? With those words, she's given it back to him. If she doesn't meet a condition. Cast up the curtain. Look how that it is. What curtain? The bed. She's on one side, he's on the other. He's like holding it. I don't want to see your ugly face. And so she's talking to him through the curtain during all of this. She says, pull it back. Look how that it is. How that what is. See reality. Open your eyes. And when the knight saw verily all this, that she so fair was, and young also, for joy he hint, that is, grabbed, took her in his arms too, his heart bathed in a bath of bliss, bath of bliss, 1,000 times in a row he began to kiss her, and she obeyed him in everything that might do him pleasance or liking. In other words, it's their wedding night, right? Have at it. Whatever he wanted. And thus they live unto their lives' end in perfect joy. And Jesus Christ send us husbands. Who's the us? The wife of Bath, okay? Us. Any other women on the pilgrimage that we know of? Nuns and a prioress. They're not looking for husbands. They have a husband, Christ, okay? In Jesus Christ, send us husbands, what? Meek, young, and lusty. That's what fresh abed means. Horny. And grace to overbide them that we wed. To control them. Jesus, help me control my husband. That not will be, also I pray Jesus shorten their lives, that will not be governed by their wives. And old and angry niggards of dispense, God send them soon very pestilence. Now, think of the wife's actual tale, and then the last 8 or 9 lines.
Do you not think that she contradicts herself?
That's my point exactly.
Because I'm reading this. Well, I finished it 2 nights ago, and the whole time I'm thinking this last section where the knight asks her to choose of her own volition what she would like to do, and then she chose to become young, beautiful, and I guess maybe in her mind initially thinking, I'll give him what he wants, but I'll also be the one sleeping around. But then the wording here shows that she's going to be loyal and true, good to him, and it's active voice all throughout. He clasps her, he kisses her, so he still has all the agency and power. She gives him everything he wants, and then it also sounds like at the end she's trying to save her story by saying, but also these men need to die. It sounds like she's contradicting herself.
Well, bear in mind there's kind of 2 voices. There's the voice of the old woman within the tale speaking, But then there's the voice of the wife of Bath voicing the old woman, okay? So within the tale, what you just said is exactly, she gives him everything he wants. He gives her everything she wants. She gives him everything he wants. Notice what they've both just done.
Submitted to each other.
Not me, but thou. Not I, but thou. Okay? Submitted to each other. It's almost, I'm not saying it is, a fictitious version of Paul's advice to husbands and wives. He says, wives, submit to your husbands. Husbands, does he say, beat them down and do what you want? No, he doesn't. He says, do what? Treat your wife like Christ treated the church. How did Christ, quote unquote, treat the church? He died for it. How's that for submission? That's maybe even a little bit more than wives, submit to your husbands. And it's both of them. Don't demand sex from the other, but your body's not your own. That applies to both of them, Paul says. Okay? And if for a time you need to not have sex, then you agree not to, all that kind of stuff. And then the wife comes back with those last 8 lines. And what does she do? She undercuts all of this that the tale was about. Why? Because she can't shut her blinking mouth. This is Chaucer, and he does this with every character but 2. I would actually argue maybe with every character but 3. The knight in the Knight's Tale, which starts the Canterbury Tales. But definitely the parson and the plowman. Chaucer raises them up. They are the perfect models to be emulated. And both of them he equates. Or equates maybe not the right word. He portrays as true models of Christ. The person as a vicar who's supposed to live out Christ's teachings and such, and the plowman as a follower who also does everything that medieval Christianity teaches. Putting others before yourself, not taking money for doing good works, the whole 9 yards. Everybody else, they get undercut at one place or another. Why? Chaucer, if you watch one of those lectures, Chaucer in the Canterbury Tales, he's got these 3 different elements of society, what are called the 3 estates. And he works them all, they normally would not all be together. That's one of the beauties of this. You wouldn't see a knight walking around with a plowman. Just wouldn't happen. They walk in different circles, okay? And what Chaucer does is he, as Stephen King says about writing, he throws characters into a room, in a situation, and then he just steps back and watches what the characters do. And he writes the story based upon what the characters are doing in that situation in his mind. Well, Chaucer's doing the same thing here. But one of the things Chaucer is doing, to use an image from Hamlet, he's holding a mirror up to nature. And he's saying, you upper class gentles, this is you. Is it a perfect picture? No, it's not. What does Sir Gawain of the Green Knight, the author of Sir Gawain of the Green Knight, do? The same thing. In other words, you talk about this noble behavior and this noblesse oblige. You're not doing it. This is doing it. Okay? And he gives us an image. We see that with the wife of Bath. She's an upper middle class person of society. The knight is the highest person in society here. Okay? We get the partner, we get the Sumner, we get other characters, the friar. These guys are supposed to be clerical models of Christ. And they're horrible. I mean, Jim Baker, Tammy Faye, televangelist crooks have nothing on these medieval friars and monks and etc. Okay? If she'd only shut up. We had a student several years ago, master's student. He had me for Chaucer and then graduate level for Old Middle English Chaucer and then Old English and Beowulf. And he did a master's thesis written for Dr. McDaniel. I was a second reader. And he looked at the wife of Bath's tale from this notion, and he argued essentially just what you did in about 150, 200 pages. And how everything in the tale, not the prologue, lifts this up as the model. But the prologue and those last 8 lines serve as what? They're an envelope. It's like the tale is a bubble. She prefaces it with definitely not this. The opposite of this. The wife of Bath, as Chaucer portrays her, lacks all gentilesse. She is, to put it one way, morally what the old loathly woman is. Before she grants her husband she's morally old, low-born, and ugly. Her character is that. Okay? But what does the wife of Bath think about herself? She's walking around here, tiptoes, looking down at everybody. Okay?
Did you specify that the last 2 husbands she had, she married them because she was like in love with them and not like for like money or something?
Well, yes, she mentions she married them for love. But you have to define love.
What is her form of love?
Well, it pretty much comes across as sex. They married her for
or
money.
Least like her, yeah, like her, I guess
Her desire, because they were both younger than she was.
right.
The first 3 husbands she married for money, and it's implied they were much older. And they died fairly quickly and maybe had a little bit of help. Okay, I mean, we do know they beat her, and she fought back. Okay,
I mention that because I feel like this story is, or at least like her tale is ultimately her like fighting with her own philosophy about like women's like, I don't know, independence or what do you want to call it. Because like she had those 3 previous husbands that she married for money, and then the last 2 married her for her money, but she ultimately married them because she loved, or at least her version of love.
right.
And this tale, she is sort of surface level saying, okay, but men should be submissive to wives and wives should have their, or women have their agency, whatever, but like severely undercuts that entire philosophy like several times here. So it's like she's fighting with her own philosophy, like, okay, like I want love, but also I want like both ends sort of thing.
Right, but I also think you have to look at it also from Chaucer and the time period. I mean, I was thinking about this the other day at home. This is so radical for the late 14th century. I mean, and a lot of people have written, modern feminist critics have talked about Chaucer as a proto-feminist. I don't go there, because every proto-feminist idea Chaucer kind of raises within the tale or the prologue or the argument, the segue between one tale and another that sets up that tale, it gets undercut. And I think that's because Chaucer is, how do I want to put this? Cunning. Smart. I don't mean cunning, deceitful. He realizes the dangers. If he goes too far. See, and one of the things Chaucer's doing is he is questioning somewhat the morality of late 14th century England, but he's not the only one doing that. The Vision of Piers the Plowman that I had written over here the other day, he really calls into question the morality of the late 14th century, the morality of the church. I mean, he's essentially, the church needs to be burned down. And you have kind of a proto-Reformation in the 14th century with John Wycliffe and Jan Hus in what is today the Czech Republic, Wycliffe in the British Isles. You know, Wycliffe actually starts, and his followers continue this, starts translating portions of the Bible into Middle English. It's the first time this is done. That it is in a language everybody could read. If they can read, that everybody has access to. Because not everybody had access to Latin. The Bible was only available otherwise in Latin at that time. Okay? But Wycliffe starts translating it, etc. It kind of dies. We get up into this period and we get other English translations, and those translators are killed. Miles Coverdale, I think it is, dies in prison, and Henry VIII, I think it's Henry VIII, actually has his bones dug up, burned, and scattered as a kind of a double whammy for you shouldn't have done this. And then Henry VIII takes Miles Coverdale's version of the New Testament, reprints it as his own, essentially. And it's the first official kind of English translation, at least of the New Testament. So Chaucer's, he's real early. We're going to see when we do some of the stuff in the 16th and 17th centuries. We're moving more towards some of these proto-feminist / feminist ideas. But again, it's still really dangerous. Not as much when Elizabeth is in charge, but when James, Charles, Henry VIII, you don't challenge the masculine status quo under those guys. Okay, Chaucer dies. Yes.
Just another thing about the last 8 lines or whatever. Do you think this could be about like her ex-husband? Because it talks about.
Oh yeah.
Meek and young and fresh in bed, and the first ones the first 3 she had were old and beat her, and then.
And she only married them for money, but the last 2,
Yeah.
apparently they were good, but they died. So she's on the prowl for number 3, which remember the partner interrupted her. Okay, and then the summoner and the friar got involved, and we're not told the age of the partner. We're not told the ages of the others. There are some young men on this pilgrimage. The knight has his squire, who is also his son, and we're told he's got blonde, curly hair. He's a lusty young bachelor, etc., etc. Within the fiction of the Canterbury Tales, I think it is entirely safe, let me put it this way, to imagine the wife putting moves on him. Or the yeoman that the knight also has with him. That is, a guy who works in the forest and such, maybe does some of his hunting for him, provides the game, things like that. Same kind of thing. I don't think she's just sitting there all high and holy, riding on her little horse, praying as they go. She's looking for prospects. All right? Okay. Let's leave Chaucer, leave the Middle Ages, and jump up to a few years later. I think I talked about 1453 before. Johannes Gutenberg invents the movable type printing press. I think one day I mentioned it, I just called it the movable printing press. Like you could take it from here to there, which you could do. But its import was you had movable type so that you could rapidly print multiple copies of a text. Okay? China had a printing press of sorts, wasn't like Gutenberg's. I think it is as early as around 900 or 1000. All right? But with Gutenberg, and this, by the way, is where we get our terminology for uppercase and lowercase, capital letters. Okay? Capital comes from italic or from Roman, Latin language. Uppercase is if I was a printer and my printing press was here, I would have a case. You can get on Facebook Marketplace and you'll see every now and then 1 or 2 of these for sale. There have been a couple just in the last year here in the national area. Down here will be a box, essentially, with a whole bunch of compartments. Right? Up here will be a box with a bunch of compartments. A, B, C, D. Multiple pieces of type in each of those boxes. Why? Because if you set a page of text into type, you need an awful lot of all of the letters. I'm trying to remember the most frequently used letter in the English language.
E.
Yeah, E. Okay? So a lot more E's than X's or Z's. Okay? A lot of I's, a lot of vowels, obviously. Right? So uppercase are the larger letters. Lowercase are the small forms of the letters. So he invents that in 1453, and we have, by 1475, William Caxton has shops set up in London, and he is now starting to print the quote-unquote great works of English literature. For example, Thomas Mallory's Le Morte d'Arthur. It's one of the first things printed. So people can start reading about the Arthurian tradition. They might have heard stories, but they couldn't read them on their own. One of the things that happens as a result of this, literacy goes through the roof. People want to be able to read, and so they start learning how to read. I think it is by 1600, it's something like 90% of the people in England could read. That's higher than in the United States now. Okay? You had an explosion of publication of books, of printing of books. Prior to 1453, how would you get a book per se? You go to a monastery, or you go to a clerk, somebody's been to university, and you hire them to make you a book, handwritten, everything, hand illustrated, which is why some of these medieval manuscripts, when they become available, they're selling for tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars, some for millions if they're fine illuminated manuscripts and such, right? This is in northern Germany. Renaissance humanism begins in Italy, and it begins a lot earlier than 1500 or so. It begins in the late 13th century with the Florentine painters, Giotto and others. Okay, one of the things that creates the opportunity for what's called Renaissance humanism is the result of the Crusades. Okay, Crusades began in the 11th century. Where were the Crusaders crusading? Supposedly the Holy Land, Jerusalem, modern-day Israel or Palestine. Well, that's where they began. But it got to the point where you had Western, by which I mean European soldiers, marching on Eastern, by which I mean Byzantine or Orthodox Christian centers. Antioch, for example. Even though Antioch was controlled by Arabs, Muslims, okay, the church was still allowed to survive, etc. It still had manuscripts, things like that. Constantinople. Constantinople was raided first by Western Catholic Christians. I mean, they actually killed priests in the Church of Hagia Sophia, the greatest church ever built. We still don't understand fully how Justinian built that sucker in the 6th century. Women were raped on the altars, literally, by quote-unquote Catholic Christians, okay? One of the things that happened as a result of that, and then later, 1453, also, is that right? Yeah, it is. That's the date of the fall of Constantinople. It's the end of what's kind of called, wrongly, ultimately the Roman Empire. Rome fell in 410. But Constantine, in the 300s, Constantine had moved the seat of the Roman Empire to Byzantium, which he renamed Constantinople, and created two Romes. You had New Rome, Constantinople, Old Rome. So you had a Western emperor and an Eastern emperor. The Western emperor was overrun in the 400s. Rome was destroyed for the most part, okay, and was run by the barbarians. New Rome kept going. And that's where all the learning transferred to, okay? So it was in Constantinople that you had manuscripts copied, rewritten, etc., etc. When the Western Christians raided Constantinople, one of the things they did is they were bringing back manuscripts. From Constantinople to Venice, people were copying them. It's called the Renaissance rebirth. Why? It's a rebirth of what?
Classical ideas.
Classical learning, classical ideas. That learning and those ideas were found in the manuscripts that were largely in Constantinople. And those manuscripts were brought to the West, translated, copied, disseminated. They become the basis, they largely become the basis for the educational system in the 16th, 17th centuries and such. Okay? That's when algebra enters the Western curriculum. Never should have done that, by the way. Okay? So, Renaissance, rebirth of learning. So that's 1485, we've discussed. Battle of Bosworth Field. Richard III, last of the Plantagenet line, is defeated by Henry Tudor, okay, who becomes Henry VII. Tudor's Welsh name, it's the Welsh form of my first name, Theodore. Okay? And when he does that, Henry VII becomes the first of a line, a monarchical line, the Tudor monarchy. Henry VII, who is followed by Henry VIII, who's followed by his son Edward VI, who's followed by his eldest half-sister, Mary, who's followed by her younger half-sister, Elizabeth. Okay? Henry VII, their dates are up here. This is 14, these are their regnal dates. 1485 to 1509, Henry VIII, 1509 to 1547, Edward VI, 1547 to 53. He was like 16 when he died, really young. Mary, 1553 to 1558, and then Elizabeth I, 1558 to 1603, one of the longest reigns in British history. 45 years. Okay? She gets an entire age named after her, the Elizabethan period. Couple of things. Edward VI is the son of Jane Seymour, Henry's third wife. Okay? He's the youngest of the three children. Mary is the daughter of Catherine of Aragon, Henry's first wife, who had been his brother Arthur's wife, briefly, okay, for like 6 months. He died. Henry argued I should be allowed to marry her because she and Arthur never consummated their marriage on the basis of what was said, because she wasn't pregnant. Okay. Elizabeth was the daughter of Anne Boleyn, his second wife, who he was already sleeping with before Rishi. Catherine was even in the grave. Okay. The Reformation, let me talk about briefly. Protestant Reformation begins, it's usually dated, 1517. Let me give you an exact date. Anybody know what the exact date is? October 31st, 1517. Why? How can I date it that specifically? Well, because this guy, Martin Luther, an Augustinian monk, that is, he's a monk of the Augustinian order. There are 4 orders of monks: Augustinians, Dominicans, Benedictines, Franciscans. Okay? Some of those orders go back to 600 or so. Get the right one. Benedict of Nursia is the founder of Western monasticism, 6th century, and then the others come later. Martin Luther was a monk who got fed up with the practices of the church. Okay? And on October 31st, 1517, he was in Wittenberg, Wittenberg. I always pronounce it in German pronunciation, Witten, and I'll have students write on, exams. If I'll say, where was Martin Luther from? They write Vitten, Wittenberg. He goes to the church door in Wittenberg and he nailed 95 theses to the church door. What's a thesis? Anybody? An idea, topic, and argument. It's a point you want to argue. He had 95 of these that he nails to the church door. And this is kind of like, to any and all who are interested, let's debate. Let's argue these 95 points. And they were 95 points of problems he had with the modern practice of the church. He did not set out to begin the Protestant Reformation. He did not set out to break away from the Catholic Church. He wanted to clean it. He wanted to get rid of its excesses. For example, I think I alluded to, when we began talking about the Middle Ages, when Thomas à Becket was killed, you had the Avignon papacy and the Rome papacy. You had the two papacies. Well, Luther realized, even though that's a couple hundred years at least before Luther, that's a problem. There's a huge theological issue there, okay? But other problems arose. One of those had to do with the sale of indulgences. Thank you. Okay? Which were permissions, essentially, slips of paper that were sold by Rome, by the Pope, that could buy members, could buy whoever, time out of purgatory. They don't get you out of hell. If you're in hell, you're screwed. Literally. Okay? Yes?
Is that kind of like that thing? I saw if you follow the Pope on Twitter, you have less time in purgatory. I saw that somewhere.
Are you serious?
Yes, I saw that somewhere a long time ago.
Yeah, that would be the modern version. That would be the modern version of indulgences.
I swear I saw that somewhere. I can't. Is anybody Catholic in history really does repeat itself? No, I'm serious. Let me look it up.
Go ahead and look it up. That would not have been, Twitter wasn't around then. John Paul II would roll over in his grave. He knew about that. Francis, I wouldn't, my own opinion, I wouldn't put anything past.
They did it in 2013.
2013? When did Francis become Pope? He hasn't been Pope that long, so that would be under Benedict. That really surprised me.
It was from Pope Francis. He tweeted it on
Oh,
something.
okay. Well, because I was going to say, Benedict was very conservative. He would not have done it. So indulgences. You can get indulgences in various denominations. 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, etc. Guess how that worked?
Pay more.
$5, $10, $20, etc. What pissed Luther off about this was an indulgence seller came into his area, guy named, I'll write his name down, no, because we know his name, Johannes or John Tetzel, Tetzel, who used to sing a little song. As soon as a coin in the coffer clinks, the soul from purgatory springs. So, put your coins in, buy the indulgence, and your long-lost family member gets out of jail. You buy the get out of jail card. That was bad enough in and of itself. Okay? What really angered Luther was you can buy indulgences for sins you hadn't yet committed. So, you're a red-blooded German male, and you see this beautiful woman walking down the street. And because you're a particularly licentious male, you think, I want to rape her. Or maybe I just want to have sex with her. Maybe it's not rape. So you go buy your indulgence for rape 30 years out of purgatory, and then you go rape her, and when you die, you, since you can't literally take it with you, you metaphorically wave to whoever's guarding purgatory. So out of the 5 billion years I have here, I get 30 off because of this. Really angered Luther. And one of the reasons also, not just because theologically that's more screwed up than one could possibly argue. The money didn't stay in Germany. It went to build St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. See, Luther said, at least if the money stayed here, I wouldn't have as big a problem with it. Again, theological, there's all kinds of issues there, okay? That's just one of the issues. Celibacy of priests was another one. Celibacy of priests doesn't go back to the New Testament church. Celibacy of priests doesn't start until, I don't know the exact date, but it's not until like after 900 or so. Okay? The Eastern Church, Orthodox Church, never had celibacy of priests. And the Catholic Church is now kind of starting to toy with the idea. But you can, for example, because I met one when I was in, met one like, you know, weirdo or whatever, not like that. I met a priest in one of my visits to Oxford who had been Anglican. Anglican priests can marry. He'd been Anglican, he'd become Catholic. He was still a priest. You can be a married priest in that situation. If you came into Catholicism already married, you didn't have to divorce your wife, because that would be a big no-no, you know, so you'd kind of start between a rock and a hard place, okay? So, Luther does this in 1517. Nobody takes him up. Nobody agrees, no bishops, etc. So, he starts writing all these kinds of pamphlets and tracts, etc. And because the printing press has been around for over 50 years now, these things get printed and they spread throughout Germany. Protestant Reformation has begun. In 1521, Luther is invited to attend. Where do I keep putting that marker? Luther is invited to attend the Diet of Worms, which, if you've read Hamlet before, you have a line in Hamlet that talks about a certain convocation of politic worms. Everybody takes that to be an allusion to the Diet of Worms, or Worms, okay? The Diet of Worms was, Diet there means a meeting. Luther was invited to come to the town of Worms, where he would get to have his debate. He says, cool, I'll go. 2 conditions. I am granted safe passage to and safe passage away. Nobody can kidnap me on my way to and take me off and, you know, kill me. And nobody can take me when I'm leaving and take me off and kill me. Holy Roman Emperor says, fine, we can do that. Luther arrives, according to one of his biographers, it's really his most famous biographer. Luther arrives, he gets into the convocation hall, and there's a table stacked with everything he had written in the preceding 4 years. All of it. And he's told one thing. Here's the debate. Recant. Yes, Lord. Take it all back. Okay? And he's like, not what I was expecting. Give me 24 hours to pray and think, and I'll come back and tell him the answer. According to the biographer, Luther comes back the next day and says, unless I can be proven by reason, my conscience, or the authority of Holy Scripture, here I stand, I can do no other. In other words, I stand by every last letter in every last one of these. I'm not wrong. Prove to me I'm wrong. They can't. They don't. I shouldn't say they can't. They don't. Okay? Luther leaves, he's kidnapped by his friends.
What?
They take him to a castle and he starts translating the Bible into German. Why? Because Luther thinks an individual with the Bible can find salvation. That's all you need. You don't need priests. You don't need a church. You don't actually have to have sacraments. And you get, from Luther and from Calvin, who I'll mention in just a minute, you get the 3 mottos, so to speak, of the Protestant Reformation. Sola gratia, sola fides, sola scriptura. Grace alone, faith alone, Scripture alone. That's it. Grace alone, no works. You don't have to do anything to be saved. It is totally by God's grace. Okay? Faith alone, you just got to believe. And they posit various proof texts from the Bible in Scripture alone. Anybody with his or her Bible, if it's in their own language that they can read, can properly find their way to God. You don't need a mediator between you and Jesus. Jesus is the mediator. Paul talks about in various letters and such. Okay? This results today, and I'm not trying to be negative or anything like that. I used to be hardcore Protestant, hardcore Calvinistic Protestant. I'm not anymore. This is what leads to today there's like 25,000 Protestant denominations in the world. And some of those are like, hey, let's start a church. We're a Protestant denomination. We're the whatever kind of a thing. Okay? Based on this. Okay? Calvin. John Calvin, or Jean, G-E-A-N, or J-O-H-N, a Swiss theologian. In 1536, he publishes his Institutes of the Christian Religion. And all that's meant by institutes is doctrines. Doctrines of the Christian religion. It's a big 2-volume massive work where Calvin outlines all of the doctrines of Christianity as he understood them to be. Shoot, I forgot to write that down. According to Calvin, those doctrines can be subsumed. Oversimplification. Okay? But everybody does this, so it applies. The first part of it, total depravity. Unconditional election. Limited atonement. And sorry, this is not a religion class, but all of this is really important for all the literature we're going to be reading. Irresistible grace and perseverance of the saints. So, Calvinism in a nutshell. Total depravity of everybody. We are all, Calvin's terminology, totally depraved. It doesn't mean that we all walk around every day, 100% of the day, X-rated thoughts. It means every aspect of our being, every aspect of our actions, everything we do and think and are is tainted by sin. So you're walking out of Publix and there's a little old lady and she's carrying her groceries and she drops them. You bend over and help her pick them up and carry them to her car. Oh, that's a wonderful good deed, etc., etc. But that good deed is tainted by some kind of selfish or egotistical or narcissistic thing inside. It made you feel good to do a good deed. So it wasn't entirely altruistic. You did it to make yourself feel good. Okay? Everything is touched by this sin. Okay? Unconditional election. God chooses who's saved, and that's it. It's unconditional. There is nothing we do that merits that election. And that term, merit, is very important because it becomes extremely important in medieval Catholic theology. You can merit grace in the medieval Catholic Church by your behavior. Okay? So this is unconditional election. And election means you're saved and the rest of you go to hell. That's it. Doesn't matter anything else. And according to Calvin's theology, the vast majority of humanity goes to hell. The elect are few. Many are called, Jesus says, but few are chosen. The called aren't the elect. The chosen are the elect. Right? Limited atonement. And notice each of these builds upon the one above. Limited atonement. Jesus didn't die for everybody. He only died for the elect. So when Paul says, and just as Christ died for all, he didn't really mean it. It's almost like if you're Presbyterian, you have to put a parenthesis after that. I used to be hardcore Presbyterian. You put a little parenthesis after that. And Christ died for all of the elect. No sense dying for everybody else, because they're not going to hell. They're not going to heaven. They're going to hell. So his atonement is limited. Okay? Irresistible grace. If you are among the elect and Christ died for you, then God showers his grace upon you. And it's like a rain shower. You can't escape it. If you're chosen, you have no choice in the matter. This is the flip side of fatalism. Or this is the flip side of Greek fate. Okay? You can't resist it, no matter what. And that leads to perseverance of the saints. If you've been chosen, if you're the elect, if Christ died for you, if grace has been poured upon you, you will persevere to the very end. You will stay loyal to Jesus. Okay? And what this means is, I'll give you an example, a ludicrous one. If Billy Graham, when he died, Billy Graham was not Calvinist, but he was Protestant, Baptist. If Billy Graham, when he died, on his deathbed said, I've lived a long life, I've preached the gospel, and here I am dying. F you, Jesus. That would indicate not among the elect. Why? Because he didn't persevere to the end. Okay? People who are dragged, Christians who were dragged into the Roman Colosseum, who renounced their faith, weren't Christians. They thought they were, until they renounced their faith. By the very fact that they renounced their faith to live means they didn't persevere. Not saved, in other words. Who's the biggie? Who's the big example of this? Judas. Judas. Because what did he do? Not only betrayed Christ, it's what he did after he betrayed Christ that shows he wasn't this. Because somebody else the very same night betrayed Christ. That person betrayed Christ 3 times. Peter. Judas goes out and is overcome with guilt and kills himself. Suicide is the unforgivable sin. Why? Because you can't ask for forgiveness afterwards. Peter 3 times responded to, Peter, do you love me? Peter, do you love me? Peter, do you love me? And 3 times he affirms, canceling out the 3 denials. Yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Yes, Lord, you know that I love you. It doesn't hit him at the time, it comes later. Okay? So, you're going to persevere no matter what. Why emphasize the Protestant Reformation? Because during this whole period, from late Henry VIII up to at least James, you've got this huge conflict, huge intellectual conflict throughout Europe and Great Britain between Catholicism on one side, Protestantism on the other side. Now, Henry's Reformation, the Protestant Reformation in England, that's begun under Henry VIII, this is namby-pamby stuff. Henry is not a dyed-in-the-wool, true Protestant believer. Henry's more of a Bill Clinton, can't we all just get along, and don't ask, don't tell. I want to ask you if you believe in the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist, and you don't tell me if you think it's just a memorial. That was a huge theological conundrum throughout the 16th century. Is Jesus really present in the wafer and wine, or is it just a memorial? And people went to death over it. I mean, they were literally killed over what they believed on that issue. Okay? Luther, Shakespeare, I'm just throwing this out there. Shakespeare was born April 23rd, 1564, or thereabouts. He was baptized 3 days. He was baptized on April 26th. It's on the basis of the baptismal date that we assume he was born on April 23rd. He died on April 23rd, 1660. Probably on his birthday, 52 years later. I'm 61. Shakespeare wrote 37 plays, 154 sonnets, and 4 really long poems, and he didn't do that in 52 years. He did that in about 20 years. Maybe 25. Add all that up. We'll take all the poems out, just the plays. He wrote on average about 1.5 plays a year during his productive period. And not, one of my other textbooks, not stupid little one-act plays. Not knocking people who write one-act plays, but these are full-length, 5-act Shakespearean plays. Some of them taking 4 hours to produce Hamlet. Okay? It's disgusting. April 23rd is significant. It's the patronal feast day of England. It's the day of St. George. Okay? So, move back up here. Henry VIII dies in 47. Fat, bloated, sick, disgusting. He dies. His youngest child, Edward, becomes king. Why? He's male. That's it. It's not because the wife was more loved or anything like that. She was. I mean, he really did apparently love Jane Seymour and Anne Boleyn, even though with both of them he was cheating on. He becomes king pretty young, 10 years old, I think it is, 10 or 11. He's sickly most of his reign. He has a, for lack of a better phrase, a Lord Protector, kind of like Beowulf with Hardred, kind of standing behind him during the whole time. This is when the Protestant Reformation really takes off. Edward is really Protestant. Almost Puritan-y Protestant. Should have mentioned, 1536 is not only important for the institutes of the Christian religion, it's also when Henry does what's called the dissolution of the monasteries. This is huge. Because of his advisors and such, and because he needs to fund his wars, Henry is persuaded to sell off the monastic lands, which the monasteries are one of the largest landholders in England at the time. So one of the things that happens is all the monks get kicked out. They all immediately become homeless, as do the nuns in monasteries, women's monasteries, okay? The properties are sold essentially to the highest bidder. So you have all this money coming in. One of the things that happens, a couple of the things, that happens as a result of this is one, many of the monasteries are taken apart. The stone is used to build other buildings, new castles, new manor homes, things like that, which is one reason why you go to an awful lot of ruined monasteries today. It's not because they were ruined by Viking invasions. They were torn apart by Henry's people, okay? A lot of artwork is destroyed, medieval iconography that is on the inside of the churches and the monastic buildings and such. And it's been estimated probably 90% of medieval literature is lost. As a result, the 90% is as a result of two things: the Viking invasions and the dissolution of the monasteries. Because one of the things that happens with the dissolution of the monasteries is they go through the monastic libraries. Okay? And the guy in charge of this was thoroughly Protestant. And anything that smacked of Catholicism, destroy it. A lot of books, a lot of manuscripts that were in the monasteries were things like saints' lives. That's Catholic. It's Catholic nonsense. Burned. Burned. Every now and then, a manuscript will be discovered and such. I was in Oxford in 1995. I was teaching an English course in London. I was at Oxford one day with students. They were wandering around. And I went into this old secondhand bookseller, and it was a dump. I mean, just books lying all over the place. And I go to the darkest, dirtiest part of the room where there's these cardboard boxes and books just lying, but not books, like manuscript books and other stuff. And I opened this one book that has a vellum cover, so cowhide or calf hide cover. And I open it, and it's an early printed book. It's like early 16th century, so 1500s. And I notice on the inside of the cover, where the paper of the book is glued down to the cover, underneath that paper, the vellum was part of a medieval manuscript. It's like 14th century script. And I'm going, wow. I didn't buy it, foolishly. It was like 100 pounds. It did not have that kind of money then. Manuscripts are also taken apart and reused. That's why we have some of our oldest manuscripts, for example, of various authors. The Greek mathematician, physicist, whatever he is, Archimedes. Earliest form, if I remember correctly, of Archimedes is from the 10th century. Okay? It's in a 10th century manuscript of something else that was written over the Archimedes text. The Archimedes text had been erased, scraped off, and this other text written over it. But you can look at it, think of a regular book as being like this. The Archimedes text was written this way on the sheet, okay, or on the vellum. Somebody came through, scraped all that off, and they wrote stuff on it this way. But you can go back with cameras and such, and you could read this text, okay? So that's part of the dissolution of the monasteries. Edward VI, thoroughgoing Protestant. We get the articles of the faith, articles of religion. People have to swear fealty to the crown, all that kind of stuff, to the church. Some of that began under Henry, we won't go into. Edward dies, because he's ill the whole time. Times 920. Mary becomes queen. Mary is thoroughly Catholic. It's from her we get the drink, the Bloody Mary, because she was stringing up Protestants, burning them at the stake, having them killed at Tyburn Hill in London, etc. You go into Oxford, you get off the train, you walk in on the Broad and High Street, there's a major thoroughfare, a confluence of roads, the High, and another one, and there's a monument to Hugh Latimer and Bishop Ridley, I think are their names. They were two guys, a bishop and a man who wasn't a cleric, who were martyred in 1555 or so for being Protestant. And one of them temporarily recanted his Protestant beliefs. But when he found out he was going to be killed anyways, he recanted his recantation. And when they went up to the stake, he put his hand in the fire first. The hand that signed the recantation. It was kind of like, let this burn first. And there's a monument with an inscription and such. Okay? She dies after 5 years. Elizabeth becomes queen. Long reign. It's under Elizabeth that we get a return to kind of a don't ask, don't tell policy. Do what you want in the privacy of your own home. I'm not going to question anybody's religion. If we can all just get along, we'll all get along. It doesn't last. Why? Protestant Parliament is becoming more and more Protestant. That is thoroughly Protestant. Okay? Parliament starts passing laws. For example, you need to remove Catholic iconography from churches and public buildings. In your book, did I just take that out? I think I did. On page, no I didn't, page 551, you have an example of the wall painting of the Last Judgment in the Stratford Guild Chapel. This is the church right down in the center of Stratford upon Avon, okay, that the guildsmen attended, okay? Paintings were discovered in 1804, watercolor copies published in 1807. Notice, what do you mean the paintings were discovered in 1804? They were painted over in the 1660s by the order of John Shakespeare, who was the mayor of Stratford at the time, Shakespeare's father. But he did it in such a way that you could still see the underlying image. Probably because, there's a lot of debate about this, he was still Catholic. Shakespeare's family, both parents' sides, was Catholic. Okay? We don't know what Shakespeare was himself. I have my own thought is he probably was. He probably leaned more Catholic than he did Protestant. So, 1588. So, 30 years after Elizabeth becomes queen. Spanish Armada. Spain launches over 100 galleons. I think it's over 300 actually, to invade England. Is this entirely the Spanish going it alone, wanting to overthrow? No. You have Catholics in the north of England who are plotting against the Queen. They are inviting the Spaniards in. Why? They want to make Britain back into a Catholic country. Miraculously, I use that term intentionally, most of the Spanish Navy is destroyed by a hurricane. Okay. England, not normal for hurricanes by any means. Water's way too, like only 20 or so of them return to port. The Catholics in the north of England, however, they're expecting reinforcements. They don't come. So they get punished pretty harshly. All right? After 1588, Elizabeth turns much more, how do I want to put this? Stridently Protestant. Laws get passed, for example, that forbid the practice of the Roman Mass in England. Forbid it to what extent? If you're a priest and you're caught conducting the Mass, that's a capital offense. It's not a trial. You get taken to the tower. Okay? And we have priests who are killed. We have writers, because they espouse Catholic ideas, who have their hands cut off. We have writers who have their tongues cut out. With Elizabeth's approval. All right? She dies in 1603. The Virgin Queen dies. Probably wasn't a virgin, based upon all the evidence that we have, but she never married. England, for the last 3 years of her reign, I mean, we think it's been bad since, some people think it's been bad since, 2016, since the orange bad man descended down the elevator and all that since then. The last 3 years of her reign, there was great angst in England. Who's going to rule after her? No siblings, no children. Nobody knew she'd secretly made an agreement with her cousin, James VI of Scotland, to come down to London and become James I of England. Okay? Which he does. We'll stop there because 9:26. 9:26? Yeah. I'll do the rest of these real quickly on whatever day that is, Tuesday of next week. Talk about this. Not going to say much about them. And then we'll get into whatever I have. I lost my syllabus. I must have pulled out at home. Read all of the sonnets. But I sent that one long email out, and I think I had emphasized in that email or D2L posting, ones to focus on, like a half dozen or so, maybe a little bit more. We won't get to all of those. But just read all the sonnets that are assigned. And then we'll come in and, after I briefly do this over about 10 minutes, we'll get into Shakespeare's sonnets. Remember, paper/project ideas required by Tuesday of next week, or 1 letter grade off the final grade of that project. And that is due on the 18th, the paper/project.